My name is Jacqueline Johnson and I'm 22 years old. Growing up, I always believed that there was a God. My mom would always play outside with me. In Romans 1, we find out that creation testifies to God and to His attributes, and that's exactly right. I remember looking at the clouds and the stars and even the ants, and just something inside me said, there's a creator out there. I remember my mom praying with me before I would go to bed. She raised me to be obedient to her and to my father. When it came time for me to go to elementary school, I went to a Catholic school. I went through a lot of the Catholic rituals. We had religion classes, and we even had Mass every Tuesday and Thursday morning. My teachers were moral people, and the idea of being moral just appealed to me. That was something I wanted to be. I remember my first confession. The priest assigned me 10 Our Fathers as penance to remove my sin. And from that point on, every night before I would go to bed, I would say those 10 Our Fathers. I never really thought I had messed up, but I figured, well, just in case, I want to have a backup plan, and those 10 Our Fathers were my backup plan. And from that point on, I always had the idea that spiritually you had to work for things, and spiritually you had to earn things. During the rest of my years as I grew up, I was the epitome of a good person. I was always yes ma'am, I was always no ma'am, I always got good grades. The only alcohol I ever consumed was wine at Catholic communion. I never cursed. I went to Mass from time to time. I would pray often, and I would even read my Bible from time to time. And people were always complimenting me. They were always saying, oh, she's such a good person. Oh, she's so kind. Oh, she's so respectful. And I started to believe that I was a good person. And it's funny, because I had this idea that heaven graded on a curve. I thought that God was up there, and He was looking down at people, and He was breaking people down to percentages. And I thought that the top percentage of people were the ones that went to heaven. So I looked around, and I saw a man over there getting drunk. I saw a girl over there getting high. I saw this girl that would constantly sleep around. I saw this girl that was cussing at her parents, and compared to those people, I felt really good about myself. I thought I was a good person. I thought God was pleased with me, and I thought I was going to heaven when I died. And it couldn't hurt that I had all these good works to back me up. I mean, I was tutoring my classmates. I was going to nursing homes. I was doing all this community service, and I thought, God has to be pleased with me. And that's exactly what I thought. Sophomore year of high school, my mom said, we're going to go visit a Baptist church. And growing up in the environment that I grew up in, you hear all these jokes about Baptists. They're so serious, they don't sing, they don't dance, they dress from another century. But we went anyway. And one of the first things I remember distinctly is actually taking a Bible to church. And not only that, but actually opening the Bible in church. Everyone there was so nice, they were so kind. They weren't falling asleep there, and at first I thought, this has to be fake. But something in my mind says, you know what, it doesn't matter. They're moral people, I'm moral people, I'll fit right in. So we continued attending that church. And some of the first sermons I hear, the pastor mentioned words like born again and saved, and I had never heard those words before. I didn't even know where the preacher got those words. I thought he made them up, but I figured, you know what, as time goes along, I'll figure out what these words mean. And I graduated from high school, and I was perfectly content with my life. Spiritually, I felt successful. I felt like I was good with God. Everything was fine. And then senior summer of high school, things started to change. For 3 months, there was nothing but constant conflict and feuding. Day in and day out, there was just fighting, and it started to weigh very heavy on me. I tried to go to my room, I tried to avoid everyone, I tried to pretend like the problems didn't exist, but I was constantly confronted with what was going on in my family. And then one day, this little bit of anger and this little bit of rage and hate just starts to grow. And it gets to the point where it's like a cancer and it consumes everything inside me. It gets to the point where all I'm thinking about is murderous, evil, wicked thoughts. And then one day, those thoughts just turn towards myself, and I start hating myself, I start despising myself, I start hating my life. And I want a way out. I don't want to wait till August to move. I want out now, I want to end my life now. So I thought of different ways to kill myself, and there were a few times where I came very, very close. I realized that it was the grace of God now, but at the time, it made me more angry that I didn't even have the guts to kill myself and the guts to end my life. And I remember one time I'm just sitting against the side of my bed. My knees are against my chest. I'm just sobbing. And something hits me. It's like a moment of perfect clarity. For that moment, I saw that all those murderous, suicidal thoughts were filthy. And they literally made me sick to my stomach. The more I thought, the more I realized that my so-called good deeds and my so-called goodness had nothing whatsoever to do with God. It was all about me. It was all about my ego, my reputation. How did I look? Jeremiah 17:9 says that the heart's deceitful. And I looked back on those 18 years of my life and I realized I had been nothing but deceiving myself for the entire time. And I was more angry with myself. I was disgusted with myself. I was disgusted with my nature. I wanted to change, but physically and mentally and emotionally, I was just too exhausted to try to reform myself. I was too exhausted to try to figure out how to fix this. So I became apathetic. All I wanted to do was stay in bed and live day to day and die and be done with this whole existence thing. I was tired. August 2005, I moved into my dorm in San Antonio. It's about a week or two before classes start. And I turned to a Christian radio program, and there's this host, and he's talking to this man. And one of the first things the host tells that man is, do you know that in Matthew 5, Christ says being really angry with somebody, being really hateful towards somebody is equivalent to murder? I never heard that before. And I thought the host was lying. I was like, God, there's no way God said that. So I took out my Bible, I went to Matthew 5 just to prove this guy wrong, and sure enough, that's exactly what Christ said. And the guy says, well, I'm a good person, and I would have said that too, well, I'm a good person. But the host took that man to Romans chapter 3, verses 10 through 18. And as the host is going through those verses, I'm reading along. There is no one good, no, not one. There is no one that seeks after God. No one had ever bothered to tell me, you're not a good person, there's something wrong with you. But God Himself was telling me that I wasn't good. Immediately I start thinking about excuses, I start thinking about defenses. What about my good deeds, God? What about my good works? And by God's sovereignty, that's exactly what the man being interviewed said. And the host took that man to Isaiah 64:6. All of our good deeds are like filthy rags. I would later learn that that word, filthy rags, means menstrual cloth. Outside of Christ, all our little good deeds are an abomination, filthy before God. I started to panic. For the first time in my life, I was scared. I started putting two and two together. If hate equals murder, if there's no one good, if I can't do anything good enough to get to heaven, then me and everyone around me deserves hell. Then Jacqueline Johnson, Little Miss Straight A student, Little Miss Goody Two Shoes, Little Miss Perfect, deserves hell. And I started to panic. I started whipping out my Bible and going through scriptures. I came across Ephesians chapter 2. And in the beginning of that chapter, it talks about how man is naturally dead in sin, how he's a child of the devil, and how he's a child of wrath. And how that could only change through Christ. What struck me about that passage is that there's no in between. You're either dead in your sin or you're alive in Christ. You're a child of the devil and a child of wrath, or you're clothed in Christ's righteousness, in His righteousness. There's no gray